Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. If this is your first time joining us, my name is Aaron Brockett. I'm the lead pastor at Traders Point Christian Church, and I'm joined by Ryan Bramlett, who serves on our staff teaching role. He also leads our West Campus. And so, as always, really, really good to have you on the podcast.
It's good to be here with you.
Yep.
You doing all right?
I'm doing good. Yeah. I'm doing well. Yeah, it's as of the recording of this, it's beginning to feel a little like fall outside. So I'm in a good mood. That's my favorite season of the year.
Oh, my flannel came out bright and early this year.
I did see that. Yeah. That looks good. We have been, if you've been tracking with us this season, we've been talking all about influence, which really fits well with just the theme of our podcast, that we want to shift the gravity of whatever room we walk into. We do it anyway. We want to do it intentionally. We want to do it hopefully in a positive way that influences people towards Christ. That's what we've been talking about during this whole season. I'm really excited to dive into the specific topic that we're going to talk about today, which is leadership. And this has meant a whole lot to me. If you all know anything at all about my story, I grew up in the church, but I didn't grow up ever seeing myself as a leader. And that's probably true of maybe most leaders. I'd love to hear what you guys think. But I just kind of saw myself as pretty middle of the road, solid C+ student, came off the bench on the basketball team, didn't necessarily feel like I was creating waves of any kind. And it was not until I got into college where I had a handful of just men and women that I really respected that were just around me start to call things out in me that I didn't even know was there. So they would say things like, "Man, you're really good at that," or "Have you ever thought about this?" And it was quite stunning to me, actually. And since that time, really taken up the challenge to pay attention to specifically people that are younger than me, and tried to do the same, just to try to call that out. So I'm really, really grateful for that. We have been so far this season kind of going through talking to some of our rock stars on staff and some of our ministry partners, and today would be no different. I'm joined by Jordan Jones and Ashley Balke. So thank you guys for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you
Excited.
so much.
Looking forward to this conversation. For sure. So why don't we just go ahead and we'll kick it off. Ashley, we'll start with you. Just tell us a little bit about you, your family, anything you want to share with us, and specifically what you do on staff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be a part. So my name is Ashley Balke, and I'm married to Aaron. We've been married for 17 years. We have 3 children, Jude, who is a freshman, and then Jubilee, who is 8, and Asa, who is 7. Obviously, like every parent says, they're the best kids ever. Used to think I was phenomenal mom when I had just one. I was like, I'm a great mom. And then I had Jubilee and Asa, and I was like, okay, wait, Jude was just easy. So just so much energy, so much fun to have these 3 children. So we love to just be together, going to the lake house, hanging out with our best friends. That's just enjoying the life God's given us is what we like to do. So here at Traders Point, I have the privilege of being the learning and development manager. So I serve on the leadership development team and just have the opportunity to support all things having to do with developing leaders, Christ-centered leaders. So it's a dream job. I'm so grateful to get to be a part where I really feel like the Lord has like intersected my purpose and my passion, really comes together in this role. So my big area that I contribute to our team is handling how the understanding of how learning at Traders Point is implemented and organized, and that is really managing like the learning management system. How do we structure it? How do we make it easily accessible? How do we train people well and get it into their hands quickly and effectively? So that's kind of what I work on.
That's amazing.
She's doing an amazing job, by the way.
Thanks, Jordan.
Yeah. Jordan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks again for having us on. I have to imagine as you brainstorm potential topics, hundreds probably made it onto the board, but the fact that leadership development made it, you can imagine I'm a bit giddy about that. But so for those of you who haven't had the joy of meeting before, my name is Jordan Jones, and I get the honor and pleasure of serving as our leadership development director. And so we moved here in March of 2019 from Lansing, Michigan, and so moved with my wife. So we've been married 11 years, Courtney, and she's the most creative person I know. We have a 6-year-old Lyndon. She's probably the most intelligent person I know. And then we have a 3-year-old Merritt, and she is the most passionate person that I know, and you could probably imagine, read between the lines on what I mean there. She's going to be a leader in whatever domain that she chooses, and just pray she chooses a good and righteous one. But thanks again for having us.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I want to hear a lot, because there's probably a lot of people listening to this that maybe are wondering, okay, what is it, like Ashley, you gave your description, like what is it that are we talking about here? Because I want to hear all about like the residency program, the leadership college that maybe a lot of people don't realize that we have as a church. And how did that all come about? What is that about? How can people find out more information? So we'll get to all that. But first, I just want to hear from both of you. What was it that really interested you in, like, maybe define it first. Like, what is leadership development? How is that distinct from discipleship? Because we do both, and we actually feel like they're not competing tracks. They should fit together. And then what interested you in it?
Because it's interesting. You hear the word leadership, and it's one of those beautiful paradoxes of Scripture, right? Where there's grace and truth. How does that work? Be savvy as a serpent, wise as a gentle as a dove. Where I think there's this biblical reality that everyone is a leader, and not everyone is a leader. Like there's the spiritual gift of leadership, where just God's given them this innate ability to rally people towards mission and vision and motivate. And but there's also the fact that, like, Acts 17, Paul says, like, he's given us all time and place and season to influence those around us, to stir them towards Christ. And so unless somebody's listening to this, like, in a cave in the Mojave Desert, which I doubt, like, we all have domains and places, relationships, whether it's our homes, our workplace, the church, where he's given us, like, are you influencing others towards Christ and towards beauty and towards love? And so ultimately, all of us are leaders. And so leadership development, in my mind, is leadership is multiplying yourself in another. It's developing yourself in another. And so for us in leadership development, we want to constantly be asking, is what we're multiplying healthy? Like, is it beautiful? Philippians 4:9. Is it good? Is it is it that Christ-like love, like selflessness? I loved what Ann Wilson a couple of years ago at Leadership Conference said. Like, the only definition of spiritual leadership I know is dying to yourself for the sake of other.
Yeah, that's good.
And so it's discipleship is growing into alignment with the character of Christ and being transformed by Him, and aligning to His mission. And then it's, as you go, are you stirring people to Jesus or away from Jesus? And so you're right. It goes hand in hand.
Yeah, I would say discipleship being like learning how to be a good disciple of Christ, whereas leadership development is learning how to be a disciple maker. So really reproducing, just as Jordan said. So a lot of times we can really focus on discipling and on discipleship and growth. It's needed in order to reproduce healthy, but sometimes we can just stay there. So leadership development is where we're like, no, hold on, let's shift our focus outside of ourselves and take it to others.
Yeah, we define a spiritual leader as a disciple who wants to make disciples in the most intentional and effective ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I mean, I think that, we see the New Testament model of church planting and disciple making. So even for us, we're very involved in church plants, but we say, hey, we don't want to just start churches. We want to start church planting churches.
Right. Yes,
So
exactly.
it's that little nuance there. And I think the same thing, I like that, what you just said, for people wondering how those two, because I think that the word leadership has unfortunately, a lot of baggage.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's, I remember there, for a period of time, people, it's almost like I was in a room one time and you said leadership and somebody like rolled their eyes. Like, we just kind of put everything under that term or under that umbrella. And there's also lots of examples of toxic leadership. True. There's a greater skepticism, I think, nowadays for those in leadership, because leaders are still humans. And so this is where I would even argue the case of becoming a disciple before you become a leader.
Yes.
But it's this idea of your discipleship is that, like, track where you're growing in alignment. I love what you guys said. I think one definition of discipleship that I really like is growing more and more into the image and likeness of Jesus.
Yeah,
that's your one-on-one relationship. That's the vertical. The horizontal is like, I'm going to make disciples. I'm going to share what I'm learning.
That's good.
share the heart shaping that God is doing in my life.
This all can't terminate on us.
Exactly.
If it does, like, what are we doing?
We're one
here?
generation from extinction.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I would love to hear like how you guys got to this spot of, because it's clearly, like, I know you guys very well. It's more than a job. You guys are sincerely passionate about leadership development. So just like Aaron was talking about the experiences that led him to really care about leadership development and pouring into others. What was it for you guys? Do you feel like you were born like career day as a kid? You were like, firefighter? No, I want to be leadership development.
It wasn't on the list. No.
So yeah, what were those experiences? How did we get here?
Yeah. So, well, something came to mind when you said like just born that way. It's so interesting. My daughter, when she was 3, she's a strong-willed. She'll be a great leader. But
She's your passionate one?
she's my passionate one. But I remember when she was 3, she walked into the daycare room and she was looking around. I said, "What are you thinking?" And she said, "I'm wondering who's in charge here, because if there isn't anybody, I'll be." And I was like, okay.
Okay. It's one way to look at leadership.
That's probably the closest thing to like, okay, so what's that look like in your future? But anyway, for me, we'll find out. I'll talk to you in like 15 years. Let's see where she's at. So there's nature and there's nurture. So I think obviously what I just described with my daughter, Jubilee, there's probably a little bit of nature in her, probably a little bit of nature within myself as well. But in general, I'd say most of it was nurture. It was the way I was raised and the way I was shaped. So my parents, they were community servants, they were educators, and they just were strong in character and strong in conviction. They understood that they needed to develop people. They always taught us and modeled servant leadership. So from a young age, we were seeing them serving in every aspect of their life, which is really the humility needed in leadership. And so they believed in equipping the next generation. And so I was raised with that, just seeing people saying, well, hey, teachers, as we know, are not paid substantially, so they would say, hey, not everything's about money. It's about what you're doing and how you're impacting and changing the world. And we're doing that one life at a time in the classroom. So that was a huge impact for me in seeing that modeled daily. But there was one person who really invested into me, and her name was Michelle Timmons. And she really had those I see in you conversations, calling things out like, I see this in you. I see that what the Lord has done and what he is going to do, and I believe in you. She really embodied Christ in the way in which she served us. So she was over our youth group. She opened up her home. She led mission trips. She spoke life into me and to many others. She taught me how to study the Word of God and modeled it through the way she lived. And even when I went to college, I was out of youth group, I was in college, she said, hey, I believe so much in what God has for your life. She sent me, I wasn't a missionary. She sent me money every month to support what the Lord was doing. She's like, I don't know what you're going to do with this, but I just want you to know that I financially support you. And so there were times that I used that money to be able to support, like I led worship. So being able to like buy my strings, buy my picks, being able to print my music, but then also just even at a point paying our bills when we were young and married. And she just believed in what we were doing. So I would say she helped shape me.
Yeah, so summer after freshman year in college, I worked for an organization called YouthWorks, where they just facilitate mission trips for youth groups, so youth leaders who are not usually detail-oriented, sorry for that generalization, but they can just hang out with their students. And so it was a summer-long gig, and it was week 5 out of 8. A group from a church in Lansing, Michigan brings 35 middle schoolers over, and they come on Sunday and leave on Friday. It's Wednesday morning. I'm painting in a community center alongside their youth pastor. He's like 6'5", blonde hair, just crazy Dutchman. And we're painting. He looks over. He said, "What are you studying again?" I said, "Political science, economics, like young, naive. I want to be a part of like redeeming, politics, which not my passions necessarily anymore." But he said, "Do you know Michigan State has a great political science program?" And I'm like, "No," and I don't necessarily care. I've seen snow once, and I'm actually not too distraught about that. Yeah. He said, "You're not getting what I'm throwing out, are you?" And I'm like, No, not at all. He said, I want you to be our middle school youth pastor. And I pull an immediate Moses, where I just start listing off the excuses. Like, I'm 2 years into following Christ. I'm 18 years old. I'm studying political science, not theology, right? I'm studying like power law, distribution, and economic utility, right? Not the scriptures, you know? And so I just immediately, I'm like, no. But he cuts me off and he says, stop. Like, pray about it. Fast about it. And so earlier, just a little background, earlier that year, it's the year that Crazy Love by Francis Chan had come out. And even if listeners haven't read it, like the line that I remember from that book is, pray the prayer, God put me in positions where I have to rely on you. And again, young and naive, I did that earlier that year, you know.
That's such a dangerous prayer.
I'm like, I didn't know what I was praying. And ultimately, as I'm praying about the decision to move, you know, Texas to Michigan, God just says, I'm just answering your prayer. Like your heart aligned with mine. And so I went. And so I think leadership development was nurtured in me started with that, like what Scott saw in me.
Yeah.
But then he didn't just see this in me, he called it out in me.
Yeah.
But then he not just called it out in me, he actually provided me a playground to actually grow into that.
Yeah, that's good.
And so we'd meet 3 to 5 hours a week, and he'd give me the knowledge that I needed, and then he'd send me out, and I literally had a playground, a petri dish to practice what I was learning, and then ultimately I'd come back to him, and he'd coach me through how to go. What'd you learn? What'd you do different next time? And so there's a huge study that Center of Creative Leadership did down in Greensboro, North Carolina, that found there's 3 things leaders need to grow. They need knowledge, right? They need to know what the ideal is for something.
Yeah.
But 70% of it is experience. They need those stretch assignments. They need that experience where it stretches their muscles enough where it allows them to grow, but not too far where there's tearing, you know. And then ultimately 20% is coaching. Like there's somebody to help you, like actually process what you're experiencing. And so nurture. Scott Rolfe, that 6'5" Dutchman, like modeled that for me. And it's what Jesus did, like Luke 6-10, right? He said, join me to the disciples. Then he sends them out way before they're ready, right? Like they're like, wait, you're not going with us? Like, are you serious? Yeah, no, I'll give you some instructions, but basically, yeah. But then when you come back, I'm not going to leave you in your experience in isolation. Like, let's process through what you saw.
Yeah. I love all that. I think that if you talk to the 4 of us around this table, and pretty much anybody, you know, and say, hey, tell me about your journey to Christ. Tell me about your story. Let's just go there.
Yeah.
Very few people will go, well, you know, I just came to know Christ on my own. You know, I discovered what opportunities I want. God always uses people to influence people.
Right.
We see that all the way back into the scriptures. We see that was Jesus' process of discipleship. I'm glad that you brought that up, because I've always had this thing around, you know, Jesus, you know, because anytime we like ask a small group leader to lead a group, they're like, well, you know, I don't know that I know enough, and I can't get them all together, and they're just like flaky, and you know, somebody's like, and I'm like, look at Jesus' small group.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, what a mess, what a train wreck. You know, and the fact that he, the ultimate failure, all of them bailed on him when he was arrested and crucified. They were out of the picture, and when he comes back. That's real interesting to me, because I think a lot of leaders would maybe have done some shaming. They would have said, okay, we're starting over at the beginning. I'm spending another 3 years with you. Here's the syllabus. Jesus was like, hey guys, here's the keys to the church. Peace.
Yeah.
And he like, I'll be with you. Greater to have the one who is coming, the Holy Spirit, to be in you than for me to be with you. I'm out. And that's so amazing to me, how much like faith God has in broken, sinful, fallen leaders like us. It's so humbling. So all of that's like such a great segue. I want to just share for our listeners, those who may not know, just what all encompasses leadership development at Traders Point. So talk about like cohorts, residencies, the college. Just share a little bit of what God's been doing here, because you've been on the ground floor of all this since 2019, developing this. And
I'll stay broad, because there is a lot that we're kind of working towards. And then if you want to kind of double down on anything, feel free. But so we have 3 hub areas that we work in. So first is our emerging leaders. So that's our residency program. That's 8 years running that. So that's even before I came on, 2019. And that's trying to bridge the gap between classroom knowledge and real world experience for those who are trying to enter into vocational ministry, because maybe they go to a Bible school and they've got all the classroom knowledge. They know how to, you know, work through a passage or, you know, pastoral care, counseling. but then don't know how to have a hard conversation or create a budget or, lead a meeting. And so we want to give them that boots on the ground, real world experience there. And then we launched last month, Traders Point Leadership College. So we have 9 inaugural students who are just doing an amazing job. That was a vision, honestly, from elders, from Aaron, from Greg, our executive pastor, of a couple of things. One is, how do we curb the student loan crisis? So we're doing it at a third of the cost of a typical, Bible college experience. But also, like, how do we preempt the need for a residency, right? Like, if we're noticing this gap that they don't necessarily come, or maybe they come to Christ, at Purdue and they join a campus ministry and don't necessarily even have the biblical knowledge. Like, how do we preempt the need for the residency and infuse experience from day one? So our leadership college students are doing half of their time is practicum internship, experience across the church, but also embedded in the local church. Like, instead of saying like, hey, we're move to somewhere 4 hours away, and maybe you're embedded in a local church, maybe not. Like, can we just embed their experience from day one in the local church? So emerging leaders, then staff development. So taking that knowledge, experience, coaching, we do a good bit of knowledge training of just training self-awareness, things like time management, conflict management, like who you are in Christ, who He's wired you to be, and how to lead well for Him. But then, since that's really only 10%, 90% is experience and coaching. So primarily we train through cohorts, and this is 6 to 8 leaders that are in a similar spot of leadership, coming together, iron sharpens iron, trying to grow and apply what they've been learning in the trainings. And then we have the last hub is what we do with our team members. So those who call Traders Point home, you can use volunteers, attendees, whatever your phrase is of choice there. But and we try not to create any new content or any new environment. We want to keep it consistent. So our staff are growing right alongside of our volunteers. So we do have some trainings that are online, virtual, kind of on demand. But then again, the biggest chunk is that 90%. And so we've got leading self cohorts, leading others cohorts that are, again, 6 to 8 leaders coming together, like in a similar spot of leadership, and let's take ground moving and progressing in our leadership in this next season. So Ashley, you probably have filling some gaps for me.
Shameless plug. We've got our next round of cohorts launching in January, February, right? Is it January? Yeah, at the beginning of the new year. So you can check it out on the website, tbcc.org/leadership-cohorts. But we've got some great cohorts running. I just actually yesterday got to launch a Leading Others cohort with a group of volunteers that are so excited to be a part and grow in their development. So we're using the knowledge piece that is 10%, and then in our cohort time, which is our group time, we are walking through the experience. What's this look like? And then doing the coaching. So I do the coaching in the group that we are in currently. So walking out that 100% that it takes to really effectively learn and grow. So
that's good. I love the tie between everything we're doing, not just being a knowledge piece or not just being an experience piece, but bridging those two together. I think it goes back to your sermon illustration of the golf swing, of not just being all back swing or all forward swing, but being able to put those two things together. I love that. And then just kind of looking at the leadership development department and the program that we've built. Over the years, like, what were some of like the linchpins to when you were creating this, like, this needs to be present here, and then maybe some of the big needs that you saw arise and that you're still seeing, or opportunities that we can kind of meet because of the leadership development we're offering?
So I'm a big strengths finder guy, and so my number one is learner. So I apologize that every one of my answers includes some reference to a book, but I apologize if that's not your leaning. But so I read a book called Design to Lead right before I came on. So it's written by a pastor in California and Texas, and they talk about how do you build a leadership development culture in the local church. But honestly, I think it could work in any organization. And they identified 3 things, and they all start with the letter C because they're all pastors, right? But
gotta add that alliteration.
Yeah, of course.
Alliteration. I'm a sucker for it.
I think it's cheesy, but I remembered it, so I guess it worked, right? But the first they talk about is conviction. Like, you have to want it as a church. from elders, lead pastor to, the retiree who's serving in kids ministry on Sunday. Like, you have to want it. And not just because like the mission, the vision, like necessitates it, like out of desperation, but out of like this deep biblical imperative that it's not enough for us to just, be a hospital that performs surgeries. We have to be a teaching hospital that like trains surgeons, that Ephesians 4, this mandate of equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. Like, it's what gets you up in the middle of the night. And so I think I can say with full confidence that I've seen it here, that we have that level of a deep conviction. The fact that we're 188 years old.
Yeah.
Like, even that fact alone communicates something, right? That like you can't like the bride of Christ cannot, be 108 years old without leadership development, just being in the water, the ecosystem.
Yeah, the life cycle of a typical church is about 45 to 50 years.
Yeah.
Which I remember hearing Jim Tomberlin talk about that. And my first question was, why that?
Right.
And he just said, because that represents a generation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So usually a generation, there'll be a generational leader that'll start a church, a movement, and then they age. They don't pass it on. And so then the church begins to flatline and die. So like when I was in college, I went to Ozark Christian College, shameless little plug there. I know Ashley spent a little time there, but how I got experience, and pretty much this was about the only way I got experience during the time, was through something called supply preaching, which is basically tiny little churches scattered all over the countryside that couldn't afford to pay a full-time pastor. So they would pay poor college students. And I got paid $75 a Sunday. Hey. And I would drive up there and I would preach. It was
inflation. That's not that bad.
It was pretty good money at the time. 12 people every week. And I went back. This was between Joplin and Kansas City. I went back for a conference and I was driving past and I was like, I'm going to pull in and see that church. Yeah. Pulled up. Just a field is gone. The building's gone, torn down. But the reality is that church had died long before I ever got there. It just kind of eked along. And so I think that's the conviction for us. I think, as you referenced Trader's Point, nearly 200 years old. 1834 is when it got started. And I would say this, I don't know, like the term life cycle wasn't even in the vernacular. Right. So somehow God in his grace, it did kick over, but I don't know that it was intentional. I think now what's on our radar is intentional.
Yes,
it's like, how do we intentionally make sure the life cycle kicks over? This might ruffle a few feathers. I don't want anybody to misinterpret this, but at times,
I'm ready.
At times, I feel like as lead pastor, part of my job is when I sense that the church is getting too comfortable, to make it uncomfortable. Not in an obnoxious, abrasive, destructive way, but in a way that said, like what you said, like that. But back to that prayer, like, God, we want you in this thing. We want you to do something that's so big that if you weren't in it, it would fail. And so let me just make us a bit uncomfortable. And I've said this to Ryan. I'm like, hey, Ryan, keep your eyes out, because the next lead pastor of our church might be in our kids ministry. And let's watch for that kid and call them out, call out their giftedness.
I see in you,
But anyway, that's a little bit of a rabbit trail.
No. I mean, and there's so many evidences. I mean, the fact that 4 or 5 of our senior leaders we've sent out to either church plant or pastor.
I think there's at least a dozen people that have been on staff that have either planted or have transitioned churches all over the country, from Florida to California. And that's one of the things that my heart beats faster and faster for that. Like I get texts from all of them. Regularly saying, hey, I've got this issue. Can I get 10 minutes of your time to walk through it? And we just decided a long time ago, we don't want to win just a Super Bowl. We want to win 12 of them through a family tree of coaches. So we had a coach that was like our special teams coach, and now he's a head coach of some other team, and they're winning a Super Bowl because they took some of our DNA with them. And that's how the kingdom of God multiplies and expands.
Well, I mean, the fact that we have a leadership development team of 4 staff people.
Exactly.
I get the honor of talking to a lot of churches, and that's not the case. And I don't mean that to pat ourselves on the back. It's just a values statement. I mean, the fact that one of the very first sermons I heard you share, you talked about your life plan process, where God willing, these next years of your leadership, it's been about, maybe you wouldn't say it this way, but climbing the mountain, right? But then these last years that God gives you, you want to be about pulling others up the mountain, being that teaching hospital. And so So I think conviction, like we could always ask God for more of it, right?
Yeah.
But like I think that's a strength. And then the third that they talk about is constructs, like what we just talked about. You know, there's environments you need to create where you're actually doing the development of leaders. But it's that second one that I think has been probably the one that has created the most tension in its culture. You have to be willing to sacrifice for creating a leadership development culture.
Yeah.
Like at the church level, at the ministry level, at the individual level. So at the church level, like you have to be willing to not just pursue the weekend services
Yeah.
as the only aim and the only goal. Now,
Absolutely.
I'm not the one who's like demeans or belittles the weekend service, right? Like, do not forsake the coming together of the people of God. But it's an and, right? Like it's, you know, we want to also focus just as much time, energy, and resources to people development during the week. But that takes sacrifice. That's kind of bucking an evangelical trend to do that. And I think at the ministry level, like, are you willing to sacrifice excellence in the name of development? Because there's always a rub between those two things. And then I think at the individual level, like God's given you certain strengths and wisdom and experiences, and there's going to be a point. Maybe you don't feel confident today, but there's going to be a point where sometimes it'll just be more efficient and easy for you to just do it yourself. Are you willing to make that sacrifice to make the inefficient choice to Scott Rolfe, talk to me, you know, give leadership away. Like all this takes sacrifice. We have so many competing commitments. Any organization, but specifically the church, has so many competing commitments, right?
Absolutely.
So many priorities. And it's like, are you going to progressively allow leadership development to win over some of those good things in the name of the great thing of multiplying people?
Yeah, that's so good. I think there's like, you know, when it comes to like younger leaders and older leaders, this is just observation from the seat that I sit in. When I think about the strengths of younger leaders and then potentially what maybe a growth edge for them might be, and the same with the older leader, strengths and a growth edge. So with younger leaders, I would see a strength as like a lot of what you're saying. They've done more like work on their emotional health and their, all that than probably those in older generations. I'm not meaning to stereotype it, but I would say that they're more familiar with, like my teenage daughters can speak more intelligently to like the subjects of anxiety and all that
for sure.
Absolutely.
than what my grandparents could.
Yes.
So there's all of that. There's like the youthfulness. There's the fresh lens. There's that
curiosity.
generational blessing that God's kind of placed. Like his church is always going to be in good hands because he's going to raise up the next generation. Growth edge. Entitlement potentially. Hey, you know, I know this stuff, so let me kind of get into this seat. You know, how do I don't know how many times I've like had a younger leader come up to me. I mean, how do I get to do what you do? What do you mean? Like, I don't know, like in the next 6 months or so. How do I get to And I was like, I don't know. And so the growth edge. Yeah, older leaders, just like what we've already talked about. Sage wisdom.
Yeah.
Seasonal maturity, perspective of the long game, you know, the recognition that Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. Trends come and go, all of that. Growth edge, and this is just from what I've seen, potentially, and I'm going to say this with all kindness but directness, potentially some passive aggression, some bitterness, some hey, I'm kind of getting into this season of my life and I feel like I've missed an opportunity, or maybe like, hey, you know, what are you going to do for me? You know, kind of a thing. And so I just think that there's, regardless of our age, and there's always going to be strengths and weaknesses and growth edges and things that we have to look at. And what attracts me to older leaders is a sweetness of spirit, a generosity in their time in their life, a joyfulness.
Yes.
They're just like joyful. Like, man, I'll just shout them out. You know, Mike Bro is an older leader in my life, in his mid-60s, lifelong pastor, not slowing up at all. He just teaches, great family man. I had some great conversations with him this summer. And the dude is just all about gratitude. He was just like, Aaron, and he goes, what will keep you soft and sweet and open as you grow, because you have to deal with lots and lots of challenges, is he said, just gratitude. So he said, every day I go on a walk and he goes, this may sound super cheesy, but he said, I just go the alphabet, A through Z, and I just think of things that start with those letters, and I just say it out loud on my walk, what I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
A, I'm so grateful for apples.
Yeah.
You know, B, I'm so grateful for broccoli. You know, whatever. It's not all food. But I thought that was so helpful. And he made this observation. He said, you know, have you ever noticed that the fruits of the Spirit in Galatians 5, gratitude isn't in the list? And he said, because that's something you got to choose.
Oh, that's good.
And I think that's so important for us as leaders.
Wow.
Yeah.
As we're kind of beginning to sort of land the plane, I know we have a lot of people listening to this who maybe don't feel called to full-time vocational ministry. Maybe they work outside the church. So what would you say are some of the things that they can maybe take away from this conversation as they sort of lead in their context?
Yeah, so I would say that leadership development, or the way in which Christ modeled leadership development, the making of disciples, wasn't used. I mean, it wasn't in like the traditional North American church context. Like it was used in the workplace. It was used in the
disciples
world.
were all fishermen,
Yes,
tax
yes.
collectors.
Yes.
Yeah.
So every single thing in this conversation is applicable to every person in every walk of life. Some people have the opportunity to use it within the context of a church where they're surrounded or maybe encouraged to use it in a Christ-centered manner. But in general, like, we are all called to lead and all called to walk it out. And so I would say everything is even more applicable to the person not in ministry. And there's ways to like plug in with what we are doing currently. And our big overarching vision is that it's not just staff, it's the volunteers, it's people who are attending, that we can equip and send them out so that they can be known as great leaders who love Jesus because it's overflowing out of them. So when we truly walk in the fruit of the Spirit and in love and understanding of the Word of God, and it will come out through the way we lead. So a dream and a vision for us as a team is the fact that, like, wouldn't it be so cool if Traders Point was looked at as a place who, like, there's something about this church, they just like produce great leaders. It's crazy. Like, they're just coming out, they're oozing out of their pores, and I don't understand why. And it's because we had conviction, culture, and the constructs, and we used the resources the Lord gave us to equip the body of Christ throughout the areas in which we have an opportunity to impact.
Permission to cheat and just repeat something I've already said. I mean, so a spiritual leader is a disciple who wants to make disciples and wants to do it in the most intentional and effective ways. So a spiritual leader who thinks about time management, it's not like time management hacks so I can spend more time on myself.
Yes.
It's time management of how can I maximize my time to spend on the things that God has confirmed for me to be about. Or self-awareness, like preventing self-awareness from becoming like self-indulgence or self-excuse. Like I become aware of my negative tendencies, so now I can excuse away my sin. Like, well, I'm just, I'm an achiever, I'm Enneagram 3, so I bulldoze over people. It's like, there's a problem.
God
with
understand.
That.
Taking ground for the kingdom.
It's like, no, like that's the way of Jesus. There's a problem there, or conflict management. Like that mandate doesn't come from some business book.
That's right.
The mandate
That's
comes
right.
from Matthew 18. That the way of Jesus, beautiful, healthy, flourishing relationships comes when there's an issue. You go straight to that person, and you work through it. And so, if leadership is multiplying yourself in another, like no matter if your leadership context is your home with your kiddos, your workplace with teams you lead there, serving teams at church, like constantly asking, okay, in this moment, like what am I multiplying? Like if there's an anxiety in a group that you're leading or just a member of, like, are you going to multiply that anxiety, or are you going to calm? You're going to be that non-anxious presence. Like every moment asking, my choice, my decision, my behavior, my attitude, is it multiplying beautiful things, holy things, Christ-like things, or is it multiplying anxiety or things that don't reflect the heart of Christ? And so no matter your context, like you can be thinking through questions like that.
No doubt. And I think that the misnomer for a lot of people is they think, well, as a leader, I gotta be the smartest person in the room, or I've got to have all the answers, or I've got to know what the way. And I think that one of the things that really was such a relief to me is that as the leader, I mean, I realize like I don't even know if I could get a job here anymore. Like if I was like interviewing at this point, like I'm here just because I got here before everybody else here. And so it's like this idea of like, I don't have to come up with all the ideas
That's
or be
right.
the smartest person in the room. I bring people around me who are really, really talented and listen. And one of the things that I'm learning is, as a leader, is one of the best questions I can ask is, hey, what do you think? Hey, what do you think?
Yeah.
And okay, that's interesting. And it doesn't mean we necessarily have to do that thing, but leaders don't need to have all the answers. They need to bring out the best in people. I heard something recently from Mike Bodine, who's an executive pastor at a church in Las Vegas. And he said, one of the things that we do as leaders is we just help minimize the weaknesses of those on our team and we accentuate their strengths.
Yeah.
And
good.
we just curate that. And leaders don't have to have the answers. They just have to bring clarity.
Wow.
So it's like, hey guys, here's the way forward. Here's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And I think hopefully that will be a word that would maybe encourage some people listening and maybe take a little bit of the load and the responsibility that you probably shouldn't be carrying anyway as a leader. Well, I think we're about out of time, guys. This has been such a rich conversation. Thank you both for taking the time to come and to share with us and invest in our listeners, as well as everything that you're doing to develop leaders around our church. I really, really appreciate both of you. And for those of you listening, thanks so much for joining us. And if you would, please like, subscribe, share this podcast with friends and family. It's how we get the word out. And we will see you next time.